My girlfriend said her therapist thinks I was the cause of her anxiety. When someone you love says their therapist thinks you're the source of their anxiety, what do you even say? I said nothing. I just nodded, packed my bags, and left a note that said, "Problem solved. You're welcome." It sounds cold, I know. But after years of trying to fix a toxic relationship, I realized she didn't need a partner, she needed peace. What I didn't expect were the panicked texts that came 48 hours later, each one sounding more desperate than the last. When the woman you love looks you in the eyes and says, "My therapist says you're the source of my anxiety," you don't really know how to respond. I didn't yell. I didn't defend myself. I just sat there, trying to understand how we got to a place where love felt like therapy and home felt like a waiting room. Sienna and I had been together for 3 years. We used to be that couple people called perfect. We laughed loud, planned trips, dreamed big. But lately, everything felt heavy. Every conversation turned into something about her stress, her triggers, her anxiety, and somehow, it always circled back to me. Dr. Hill, her therapist, was someone I respected. She'd helped Sienna through some dark times before we met. But lately, therapy sessions had turned into reports. After each one, Sienna would come home with a new list of things I was supposedly doing wrong. Dr. Hill says, "You need to communicate better." Dr. Hill says, "You don't validate my feelings." And then came the one that shattered me. Dr. Hill says, "You might be the reason my anxiety keeps getting worse." I stared at her, trying to keep my voice calm. Did she really say that? Those exact words? Sienna crossed her arms, her eyes darting away for just a second. That's what I understood. The phrase hung there, what I understood, not what she said. But I was too tired to parse the difference. Too worn down to ask her to explain the gap between a therapist's words and her interpretation of them. So instead, I said the only thing that made sense in that moment. "I see." Inside, my chest ached. Because I loved her truly, but I couldn't keep being the villain in a story I was trying so hard to fix. As she turned away, I looked around our apartment, the photos, the laughter frozen in frames, and wondered when we turned into this. That night, I couldn't sleep. The words kept echoing. "You're the source of my anxiety." And somewhere between midnight and dawn, I realized something painful but true. Maybe the kindest thing I could do for both of us was to stop trying to prove I wasn't her problem. The morning after Sienna said those words, everything felt too quiet. The kind of silence that doesn't bring peace, just pressure. She was still asleep when I opened my eyes, her hair messy, her face soft and calm in a way it never was when awake. For a moment, I almost convinced myself to stay. But then I remembered her voice from the night before. "You're the source of my anxiety." It kept replaying like a broken record. Not because I was angry, but because it hurt that after everything, the patience, the support, the sleepless nights, I had somehow become the villain in her healing story. I used to believe love could fix anything. Now I knew better. Sometimes, love turns into something toxic without anyone meaning for it to happen. I walked into the kitchen and made coffee like I always did. But this time the air felt different, heavy, final. The therapist had become a ghost in our relationship, whispering things I could never compete with. Every word from Dr. Hill seemed to replace mine. I wasn't Leo, her boyfriend anymore. I was a diagnosis in her mind. As I stared into my coffee, I thought about the kind of peace I hadn't felt in years. Silence without guilt, love without walking on eggshells. The idea scared me as much as it comforted me. Because leaving her wasn't about giving up. It was about not drowning quietly in someone else's storm. So when Sienna woke up and asked if I was okay, I smiled faintly and said, "Yeah, I'm just thinking." She didn't know those words meant I'm already halfway gone. That day, I packed my things slowly, no anger, no noise, just quiet movements and deep breaths. I folded each shirt like I was folding away every memory we'd built together. Before I zipped my bag, I took one last look around our apartment. The life we built together still looked perfect, but it wasn't home anymore. It was a place filled with love that forgot how to breathe. And deep down, I knew. The calm wasn't peace. It was goodbye wearing a disguise. When you love someone who's constantly fighting invisible battles, you start believing your only job is to keep them calm. That's what my relationship with Sienna had become, managing her moods, fixing her triggers, tiptoeing around her anxiety like it was a sleeping animal that could wake at any second. So that morning, when I finally made the decision to leave, I didn't do it with anger or revenge in mind. I did it with a kind of sadness that sits deep in your bones, the kind that says you can't fix what keeps breaking you. I grabbed my duffel bag and wrote a note on the small pad by the bed, the same one we used for grocery lists and movie nights. I wrote just 4 words. Problem solved. You're welcome. No explanation. No drama. Just the truth she wanted. If I was the source of her anxiety, removing myself should bring her peace, right? I placed the note on her pillow, next to the empty space where I used to sleep. For a few seconds, I just stood there, staring at it. It looked too small for something that carried so much finality. As I walked out, the morning sun hit my face warm, yet strangely cold inside. My phone buzzed with work emails, reminders of a normal life that didn't feel normal anymore. I ignored them all. I didn't drive anywhere special. I just kept moving through streets we'd walked, past the park where we'd once planned our future. Every corner was a ghost of us. But as I watched the city blur past, one truth sank in. Sometimes, the only way to help someone heal is to stop letting them use your love as a crutch. I ended up crashing at my best friend Shaw's apartment that night. He didn't ask questions right away, just tossed me a blanket, poured 2 glasses of whiskey, and said, "You look like someone who finally stopped pretending." We sat in silence for a while, the hum of the city below us. Finally, I told him everything about Sienna, the therapist, the words that cut deeper than any fight ever could. Shaw nodded slowly. "Man, I know you loved her. But love doesn't mean losing yourself." He was right. For months, I had been walking on eggshells. Every time I tried to help her through her anxiety, it turned into another reason I was doing it wrong. "You're too calm. You don't react enough. You're not validating me." I tried to be everything she needed, and somewhere along the way, I stopped being me. Shaw looked at me, his tone soft but firm. "You didn't leave because you're cold. You left because you're tired." That hit harder than I expected, because I was tired not of her, but of being the only one trying to fix something neither of us could name. Later that night, I turned my phone face down and stared at the ceiling. Part of me hoped she'd text, that she'd at least ask where I was, but the screen stayed dark. And maybe that was a sign, a painful one, that silence can be its own kind of answer. Shaw fell asleep on the couch, but I stayed awake until morning. For the first time in years, the quiet didn't feel like punishment. It felt like peace, trying to find its way back to me. 2 days. That's how long it took before my phone finally buzzed. But in those 48 hours, I went through every emotion possible: guilt, peace, regret, freedom. It was strange how quickly a toxic relationship leaves space you didn't know you needed. The first night, I kept expecting her to call. My mind played tricks. Every car sound outside felt like her pulling up. Every vibration from my phone made my heart race. But there was nothing, just silence. I tried to distract myself, took long walks, scrolled aimlessly, talked with Shaw, but deep down, I was processing something bigger. I wasn't just missing her. I was detoxing from years of emotional tension disguised as love. On the second day, I finally checked her social media. Nothing new, no quotes about healing, no sad songs in her stories, no signs she even noticed I was gone. A small part of me felt angry, like all my love had disappeared without a trace. But another part of me felt light. For once, I could breathe without waiting for the next emotional storm. The anxiety that used to linger in our home wasn't mine anymore. It had lifted. Still, peace has a cruel way of testing you. By the end of the second night, I began to wonder if maybe I had overreacted, if maybe she really didn't mean it the way it sounded. Then, just before midnight, my phone lit up. Her name, one text, trembling on the screen. "Leo, I can't sleep. Please pick up." And just like that, the silence broke. The first text hit me harder than I expected. "Leo, please, can we talk?" For 2 days, there had been nothing but silence, and now her messages came one after another like waves crashing on a shore that had finally broken. "I can't sleep. I keep hearing your voice. I need to understand what happened." I stared at the screen, heart pounding despite the peace I'd felt just hours earlier. The guilt crept back in like muscle memory. I couldn't unlearn that old reflex of wanting to fix her pain, even when stepping back was the healthiest thing I'd done in years. Part of me wanted to ignore it. Another part, the foolish, empathetic part, wanted to respond. But I didn't. Not yet. Instead, I reread every message like a detective looking for hidden meaning. They weren't angry. They were scared, lonely, searching. And behind every word, I sensed something deeper: destabilization. Maybe she finally realized that peace isn't found in blaming someone else for your pain. Maybe she realized I wasn't the source of her anxiety. I was just the one who stayed long enough to witness it. By midnight, the messages slowed down. The last one said, "I found your note. I don't know what to do with it." That one stayed on my screen for a long time, because I knew exactly what she needed to do with it. Face what she was really afraid of: being alone with her own thoughts. I didn't reply. But for the first time since I walked out, I didn't feel anger. I felt something closer to sadness, and maybe a bit of clarity that sometimes love means staying silent when every instinct tells you to speak. 3 days after leaving, that night, I drove through the old streets Sienna and I used to wander. The park where we kissed in the rain, the bookstore where she'd sit cross-legged on the floor reading poetry, the coffee shop where she'd rant about her therapy sessions. It was like flipping through a photo album in reverse, each memory clearer as I let it go. I realized how much of our relationship had been built on trying to fix things. Her emotions, her triggers, her anxiety, they were the constant guests in our home. Love became less about laughter and more about management. I'd stopped being a boyfriend and turned into a caretaker with a quiet smile. I don't blame her for struggling. Mental health isn't a choice. But blaming the people who love you for the weight you carry, that's where love begins to drown. As I drove, a song came on the radio, one we used to sing together. I turned it off halfway through. Not out of bitterness, but because I didn't need nostalgia to remind me of what was lost. I was living the lesson already. Peace and pain sometimes wear the same face when you're healing. Shaw texted me around 10 p.m. "You good, man?" I smiled at the screen. Getting there. That night, I slept better than I had in months. Maybe that's what closure feels like: not a clean ending, but a quiet understanding that not everything broken needs to be fixed. 1 week later, I'd moved into a small studio apartment across town, nothing fancy, just enough space to breathe. Shaw helped me move the basics in, and for the first time in years, I felt like I was building something that was mine. Then, one afternoon, someone knocked on my door. When I opened it, Sienna stood there. Her eyes were red, her hands trembling around a small paper bag. "Can I come in?" she asked. Her voice was barely a whisper. I stepped aside. She looked around like she was entering a museum of someone else's life. The blank walls, the single chair, the absence of us. She handed me the paper bag. Inside was a small photo frame, our picture from last Christmas. "I didn't know where else to put it," she said. We stood there, the silence thick with things neither of us could say. Finally, she spoke. "I've been thinking a lot this week about what Dr. Hill actually said versus what I heard, about how I kept twisting things to make sense of my own fear." Her words were careful, measured like she'd rehearsed them. I think I made you responsible for feelings that were never yours to fix." I wanted to hold her, to say we could start over. But deep down, I knew that love built on guilt can't stand. So I said softly, "I'm glad you're seeing things more clearly now." She nodded, tears falling. "You walking away made me realize I've been running from myself for a long time." That sentence broke something in me I didn't know was still fragile. Because sometimes the truth arrives not to fix anything, but to set both people free. She left after 20 minutes. No big declarations, no promises, just a quiet acknowledgement that we were both trying to understand what went wrong. 10 days after leaving, I got an unexpected call from Dr. Hill. "Leo, I hope this isn't strange," she began, her voice professional yet gentle. "Sienna signed a release and asked me to reach out. I wanted to clarify something that's been weighing on her." I hesitated, then said, "I think I understand what you're going to say." She continued, "Sienna came into therapy projecting her fear of abandonment onto you. When she told you I said you were the cause of her anxiety, she misunderstood or perhaps misinterpreted what she needed to hear in that moment. What I actually said was that her anxiety is triggered by her fear of losing control, and she associates safety with you. When she feels unsafe internally, she confuses that with you being the problem." Her explanation hit me like a quiet storm. Everything finally made sense. Dr. Hill sighed softly. "You did nothing wrong by walking away. In fact, that space might be the only thing helping her face herself now. Sometimes the most loving thing we can do is refuse to be someone's emotional crutch." When we hung up, I sat in silence, thinking about everything we'd been through. The arguments, the therapy sessions, the guilt, the breakup. Maybe love isn't always about staying. Sometimes it's about having the strength to walk away so both hearts can finally breathe. I leaned back, closed my eyes, and whispered to no one in particular, "Thank you, Dr. Hill, for telling the truth neither of us was ready to hear." 3 weeks later, for a while, it seemed like things were settling. Sienna and I texted occasionally, brief, cordial updates. She'd share small victories from therapy. I'd tell her about the new apartment. It felt almost healthy. Until one evening, she called, crying. "I had a rough session today," she said, her voice breaking. "Dr. Hill asked me to map out my anxiety triggers, and when I wrote them all down, so many of them connected back to memories of us, of you. That old familiar ache returned, the guilt I thought I'd left behind, creeping back like a shadow I couldn't outrun. I hated how quickly it returned, like muscle memory I couldn't unlearn." "Sienna," I said gently, "that doesn't mean I caused your pain. It means you associated with me because we shared so much of it together. There's a difference." But she didn't want logic. She wanted comfort. She wanted the version of me who'd fix everything again, who'd absorb her pain and call it love. And for a moment, I almost fell into that role. But then I caught myself. I remembered Shaw's words, "You didn't leave because you're cold. You left because you're tired." That night, I realized healing isn't linear. You can understand your patterns, love someone deeply, and still find yourself slipping into old cycles. The difference now was I recognized it. I didn't let it pull me under. Shaw called me later that night. "She reached out again, didn't she?" "How'd you know?" "Because you sound like someone fighting to stay on solid ground. Don't let her pull you back into the quicksand, man. You've come too far." I took a breath. "I know. I hate that it still hurts." "That's not weakness, Leo. That's proof you actually loved her. But love doesn't mean you have to drown with her." The next morning, I sent Sienna a final text. "I care about you, but I can't be your emotional lifeline again. You have to walk this next part alone. I believe you can do it." And as painful as it was to hit send, I knew that boundary wasn't cruelty, it was compassion in its truest form. 2 months later, life started to settle into quiet rhythm. Mornings felt lighter, nights calmer. I began therapy myself, not because I was broken, but because I wanted to understand why I stayed so long in a relationship that taught me to shrink. Dr. Nguyen, my therapist, once told me, "Peace isn't found in avoiding pain. It's found in understanding it." That single sentence changed everything. Through those sessions, I learned to stop replaying what went wrong and started focusing on what I'd learned. That love without peace isn't love, it's survival. That empathy doesn't mean self-sacrifice. That sometimes the most powerful thing you can say is no more. I started running again, cooking new meals, even planning a solo trip. Every time I thought about Sienna, I didn't feel bitterness, just gratitude. Because some people come into your life, not to stay, but to teach you how to leave gracefully. Healing wasn't dramatic. It wasn't a sudden epiphany or a triumphant moment. It was quiet. It was steady. It was finally mine. Shaw noticed the change. "You seem different," he said one night over dinner. "Lighter." "I feel different," I admitted. "Like I'm finally building a life, instead of just surviving one." He raised his glass. "To building, then." "To building," I echoed. And for the first time in years, I meant it. 4 months after leaving, one afternoon, I found a letter in my mailbox, handwritten, sealed in a pale blue envelope. Sienna's handwriting. Inside was a note that said, "Leo, I've been working with Dr. Hill on something she calls radical accountability. It means owning my part in things without excuse or deflection. So here it is. You weren't my problem. You were my mirror. Every time I looked at you, I saw the version of myself I was too afraid to face, the one who needed to stop running, stop blaming, stop hiding behind other people's words. I don't expect you to forgive me. I don't even expect you to respond. I just needed you to know that walking away was the bravest thing anyone has ever done for me. Thank you for loving me enough to let me go. Sienna." I read it 3 times. The tears came quietly, not from sadness, but from release. Sometimes we wait for closure that only time can give. Sometimes we think goodbye means failure, when in truth, it's the bravest thing we can do for love, to survive in a different form. That evening, I took her letter to the park where we'd once planned our future. I read it one last time, folded it neatly, and slipped it into my jacket pocket. I whispered to the wind, "Goodbye, Sienna." And for the first time, it didn't hurt. It simply ended. Not with anger, not with regret, just with peace. I was sitting in a coffee shop when Shaw texted me a photo, a screenshot of Sienna's Instagram story. She was hiking somewhere beautiful, smiling genuinely, caption reading, "Learning to be my own safe place." Shaw's message, "Looks like she's doing okay. You good?" I stared at the photo for a moment, then smiled. "Yeah, I'm good." And I was. Because sometimes the greatest love story isn't about who you end up with. It's about who you become after the pain ends. I set my phone down, watched the city move around me, and realized this time I had finally saved myself. And that was enough.